Good morning. My name is Shoma Ilara, and I welcome you to another edition of Sunday Morning Dose. Here at Sunday Morning Dose, we look at God's Word from Christ's perspective. If it doesn't make sense to Christ, we believe as followers of Christ, it shouldn't make sense to us. If Christ would pay attention to something, then we believe that that is what we should pay attention to. As a matter of fact, that is what we should invest in as a believer of Christ. And that is our opinion here, that whatever matters to Christ should matter to us, and whatever wouldn't matter to Christ should not matter to us. So today, let's title this "Dealing with You." It's going to be a series, but before we get into this series, we would talk about we'll just give a preamble of what this series will be before we actually go into this series, dealing with you. So the question you might want to ask is, why should I deal with myself? What is the essence of dealing with myself, with being Christ's disciple or following Christ? So in Matthew 16 verse 24, Jesus will charge his disciples to do something to maintain a perspective to following him. And the perspective is this. Then Jesus said to his followers, if anyone wants to follow me, he must say no to the things he wants. He must be willing even to die on a cross, and he must follow me. Dealing with you. That will be the series. Let's read Matthew 16 verse 24 again. I read from International Children Bible. Then Jesus said to his followers, if anyone wants to follow me, he must say no to the things he wants. He must be willing even to die on the cross, and he must follow me. So dealing with you, Jesus would say that you are against yourself here. You must say no to the things you want. Imagine me saying no to the things that I want, to the things that I consider would give me happiness or joy. Imagine me denying myself of the things that I would consider to be advantages or merit in my life. So the question here is that, how do you say no to the things that you want? Not the things that you don't want, the things that you want. How do you get to the point where you could actually follow Christ? By denying yourself. It takes a skilled follower to do this. It doesn't just happen. It's easier to reject the things you don't want. It's easier to say no to the things you are not interested in. What of the things that you want? It takes a developed mind, a developed follower, a skilled follower for that matter, to actually live this. And for us to live this, then we must understand that we have to deal with ourselves. We have to deal with ourselves. You have to deal with you for you to follow Christ. And imagine, Christ would say it even extends to carrying a cross. Of course, we know that this is figurative. Christ has already paid the price, but it means that you must be willing to go all length with him, even to carry your own cross. Meaning the journey of life with Christ is personal. That is what we could deduct from here, that Christ would require us to have a personal walk of faith with him, not a general walk of faith, a personal walk of faith with him. And if it is personal, then the person who would go on this journey must have been dealt with. And that is the essence of you dealing with you, before you could leave this charge to the fullest. So today, let's divide this series. So today we'll be looking at a topic. Your worth is never on the outside. Your worth is never on the outside. So dealing with you, one of the things you must come to terms with is that your worth is never on the outside. Think about it. My worth is never on the outside. In Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23, the wisest man in the Bible, Solomon, King Solomon, wrote this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. He says, I read again, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Guard your heart above all else, for everything you do flows from it. So we must begin to guard ourselves. So let's not take his word as our final judgment. Let's go back to Matthew, the word of Christ. In Matthew chapter 15, verse 11 to 20, something happened in the earlier verses, and then it was about the issue of the Pharisees accusing the disciples eating from an unclean hands and body, that they ought to have cleaned their hands and body before they would consume food into their body system, because it could defy them. And here is what Christ would say in verse 11. It is not what a person puts into his mouth that makes him unclean. It is what comes out of his mouth that makes him unclean. I read that again. It is not what a person puts into his mouth that makes him unclean. It is what comes out of his mouth that makes him unclean. So Jesus would say, you are focusing on what the man puts in his system. I'm focusing on what the man brings out of his system. So in Old Testament, based on the laws given to Moses, he addresses acts. It is under such testament that the Pharisees are the point that it addresses the act. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, is the act itself. Jesus in the New Testament will change the dynamics. And the dynamics is not far-fetched. That is the truth. Is that a man does not get to act in a certain way until he has thought about it in that certain way. That the act itself is a proceed or offshoot of the thought. So when Jesus came, he paid less attention to the act and focused on what Solomon would describe in Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23, the art of the man. So Jesus will address the art of the man, the mind, the thinking process of the man, rather than just the act itself, because the act in itself is not independent. It's dependent on the thought, persisting thought in a man's heart. So Jesus would say, I would rather focus on what the thought of the man is. Because if the thought of the man is negative, it's going to act negatively. And if the thought of the man is positive, it's going to behave positively, no matter what comes into the man. So your worth is never on the outside with Christ. Your worth is never on the outside. And you can describe this positively or negatively. positively in the sense that there is no amount of money that describes you as a follower of Christ. It does not describe you. There is no amount of chain on your neck, jewelry on your hands or your body that defines you. No matter the quality of the shirts that you're wearing, and no matter the quality of your wares, it does not define you. You must define yourself not from the words of the outside. It must be from you. You must get to the point where you can define yourself, detaching everything on the outside from you. So Jesus will bring this to the points I've emphasized. And in verse 16, Jesus said, "You still have trouble understanding. Surely you know that all the food that enters the mouth goes into the stomach. Then that food goes out of the body. But what a man says with his mouth comes from the way he thinks." I take verse 18 again. But what a person says with his mouth comes from the way he thinks. And these are the things that make him unclean. The way he thinks makes him unclean, not the things he does. The way he thinks makes him unclean. If he thinks in an unclean way, over time he's going to do things unclean. If he thinks in a righteous way, over time he's going to become righteous. The way he thinks. Verse 19. Out of the mind come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, stealing, lying, and saying bad things against other people. These things makes a person unclean, but eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean. So Jesus will summarize it, that your worth is never on the outside. Your worth is never on the outside. Stop basing and defining yourself by the things outside you. In the scope of things, according to Christ right now, negatively or positively. Positively in the sense that you could have amassed wealth, you could have influence, you could have affluence, and that is positive. Still, it does not define your worth. You should not define you based on the things that you have accumulated. Negatively, you might have been persecuted before, you might have been jailed before, you might have done things that you have regretted that you did. Those things, again, does not define you. Your work is never on the outside with Christ. So Christ would say to his followers, I would not judge you by an unwashed hand. I will not judge you from things that you have no control of. Things on the outside is not in your control. How someone behaves to you is not in your control. The responses you get is not in your control. Even the nation we got wasn't in our control. So I am not going to define you by those things that are not in your control. But dealing with you, your mind, your wants, that is in your control. And I'm going to base my judgment on the things that are within your control. I will think in situations of life, what we think of when we go through the situations of life is in our control. How we perceive things happening to us, the perspectives that we keep is in our control. In fact, the perspective that we keep, our mind, according to Solomon, King Solomon, it says that our mind is actually responsible for the things that we go through on earth in the physical reality. So what people do to you might not be in your control, but how you think about them before they do that, that is in your control. Your thought pattern towards your world, towards your country, towards your generation, towards your leaders is in your control. If you keep an unclean mind over time, you're going to live an unclean life. And if you keep a clean mind, you're going to live a clean life. So, of course, you want to agree with me that keeping a clean mind is a difficult task. In fact, it is not a destination, it's a journey. It's a journey that one must begin to walk through over and over again and begin. But you can't go through journey without skills. And that's why I feel this series is going to benefit you. It's going to benefit the two of us here to discuss on how we can actually deal with us, with ourselves, how we can take control of ourselves. And one of it is to come to the point where you know that your worth is never on the outside. So it's not just that you know that your worth is not ever on the outside, it's that you also it's that you also come to a standpoint that you never base people's worth on the outside, that you never treat them based on their look, on their language, on the outside, that you get to the point where you can treat people as people, human beings, irrespective of their actions, their thoughts, and their educational background. That's difficult, but it's possible because it's still you dealing with you. So till we see some other time next week, same station, continuing the conversation of dealing with you. I hope we will get to start to walk about dealing with yourself. And the first way to start is that your worth is never on the outside. See you next time. Thank you.